Today, I'm driving one of the most iconic cars ever created. Launched in Europe in 1974, this car arrived in Australia in 1975. It was sold around the world for nearly 20 years. Today, I'm driving the absolute design icon that is the Volvo 2 Series. To put the significance of this car, the Volvo 2 Series, into perspective, you need to imagine or remember what the world was like 50 years ago. You need to imagine or remember what cars we had on the roads in 1975. We had Holden Kingswoods, we had Ford Falcons. We also had a lot of old stuff from the 50s and 60s, such as Morrises and Austins and Simcas. This car was absolutely radical when it arrived. The Volvo 2 Series wasn't in fact an all-new design. The basic shape of this car had been launched by Volvo in the late 1960s as the 1 Series. However, by 1974, Volvo had a real focus on safety, which was not something that was too sexy in the mid-1970s. The styling of this car was previewed in 1972 by a vehicle called the Volvo Experimental Safety Vehicle, which was a radical technological showcase of safety. Had airbags, it had a laminated windscreen, which was pretty radical for the day. It had a safety cage construction, which meant the car could crash without injuring the occupants. So that particular car, a lot of the style in that show car ended up on the streets in the Volvo 2 Series. Definitely the most controversial part of these 2 Series Volvos styling are these huge bumper bars. These were designed for the American market. Back in the early 1970s, the US market made compulsory bumper bars that could withstand a 5-mile-per-hour shock. So this was Volvo's response. Big metal bumper bars, a big rubber protection strip, and they were mounted telescopically on shock absorbers to absorb the shock. The Volvo 2 Series was available in Australia and most markets around the world with 4-cylinder and 6-cylinder power. The entry-level engine was a 2.1 litre 4-cylinder engine, overhead cam, alloy head, cross-flow design. With a carburettor, that engine had 71 kilowatts. With fuel injection, that engine had, I think it was 94 kilowatts, and the V6 offered 103 kilowatts. That spread of engines meant that Volvo had a match for Cortina, Tirana, Falcon and Kingswood. It was actually a pretty smart marketing strategy, I reckon. Back in the 1970s when these cars were new, most cars had a name like Kingswood or Fairlane or Falcon or Mustang. Volvo, however, had a series of digits and numbers to describe their models. This is a 2 Series. The second digit is a 4. That means this car's a 4-cylinder. If this car was a wagon, it would have a 5 there. If this car was a 6-cylinder, it'd have a 6 there. And the DL is the trim level. This is actually the base model car, DL. There was also a GL and a GLE. There's your pub trivia. Can you tell that I like these Volvo 2 Series? I haven't seen one of these cars in such lovely original condition for such a long time. So I'm really looking forward to driving this one.
Are you selling a classic, collector or performance car? At Retro Rides, we'll give you a $60 voucher towards the cost of your ad. Buy and sell your car at Retro Rides for the classic, collector and performance car enthusiast.
Driving one of these early Volvos, these early 2 Series Volvos, it feels like an early Commodore. Similar layout, it's a similar size. These things had McPherson strut front suspension and rack and pinion steering, like the Commodore does. These things had a coil-sprung beam rear axle with a panhard rod, like the Commodore does. But this car arrived in Australia 5 years before the Commodore, almost 5 years. So that just gives you a little bit of a context as to how good these Volvo 2 Series really were for 1975. I've spent some time today talking about these Volvo 2 Series in relation to Holden and Ford of the 1970s. These actually weren't a direct competitor to the Holden and Ford stuff of the 70s. These were a European prestige car, these Volvos. These were they were a little bit more expensive, and they were pitched at a more luxury market. Growing up in the northern suburbs of Sydney, a lot of quite comfortable suburbs had lots of these Volvos running around. I suppose happy memories for me, but yeah, these were pretty much a luxury car. They were sort of more like a BMW or a Mercedes than they were more like a Falcon and a Kingswood. I mentioned earlier how my grandfather bought one of these Volvos brand new in 1977, I think it was. He bought that as a retirement present to himself after a career of being a school teacher. And I remember being a little kid and being fascinated by this soft plastic dashboard and having my dad explain to me that was safer in a crash. It was certainly a really big contrast to Mum and Dad's 68 Holden, which had a painted steel dashboard and no seatbelts in the back. This car that I'm driving today is powered by the fuel-injected version of the 2.1 litre four-cylinder. Volvo, of course, used the same body, or a few differences, but yeah, four-cylinder power, 2.1, or as I mentioned earlier, six-cylinder power, V6, all aluminium V6, overhead cam, 2.7 litres. These were a bit more of a luxurious car, a bit more of a prestige car. But you know what, 40, 50 years later, this car is 50 years old. They've got a pretty loyal band of followers around the world. Volvo is of course a Swedish brand, but here's a little bit more pub trivia for you. Starting in 1972, most Volvos sold in Australia were actually assembled in Victoria by a company called Motor Producers. Now this is where things get interesting. Motor Producers owned or operated the factory where Volkswagen Beetles had been made since the early 1960s. In 1968, Motor Producers started assembling Datsuns, and in 1972 they started assembling Volvos. So for most of the 1970s, the one factory produced Beetles, Combis, Volvos and Datsuns. Many of the four-cylinder Volvos sold in Australia actually had the same colours, the same paint colours as Datsuns and Volkswagens. But it was only the four-cylinder models and only if they had solid paint. Did you get all that? Volvos punched above their weight in Australian motorsport. In 1979, a Volvo came fourth behind the three Holden Commodores in the Repco Around Australia Reliability Trial. Also in 1979, a Volvo 242 GT got 20th at Bathurst. That doesn't sound too impressive, but the car was pretty much straight out of the showroom and running on street tyres. And of course, a couple of Volvos upset the locals in the Australian Touring Car Championship during the 1980s. For the 1980s, both the sedan and wagon got bigger tail lights. And as the 1980s progressed, Volvo added a few little fresh styling tweaks to the car just to keep it a bit fresh. Probably the most obvious is this black satin paint around the windows, around the glass line. Oh yeah, another thing too, I think it was 1983, Volvo stopped calling these cars 244 and 245. They were simply 240 sedans and wagons from then on. And the wagons are pretty big too. I reckon this is a pretty good looking car. This was the last styling update. The car carried pretty much the same personality, the same character from the early 1980s right through to the end of production in 1993. The car lasted for nearly 20 years, which is a remarkably long time for a car to be manufactured. As I mentioned earlier in the video, there's only a few other cars that actually lasted longer in the marketplace, such as the Volkswagen Beetle. Anyway, manufacture finished in 1993, which meant nearly 20 years of production of these 2 Series Volvos around the world. I reckon they're a bit of an icon. I hope you've enjoyed the story we've told you today. I'm Glenn Torrance, this has been Retro Rides, and I'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.